I'm just discombobulated today. How are we all today?
Good. Yeah, sorry.
No comments, please. A little bit of business to begin with. And when I got up this morning, I kept saying to myself, I know this date, I know this date, I know this date, and I finally realized what this date was. And 25 years ago today, I was sitting on a, sitting on a bus going up the Douro River, and this was a massive Greyhound-sized, bus filled with poets. Tom Rayworth was there. There were these French poets that had been in the resistance, and what I was doing was desperately trying to get the attention of the poor woman that is sitting in the back there, who I had met a couple of days earlier, and at some point, after trying to schmooze her all day long,
she said, "Fuck off, bud."
but thankfully it was in Portuguese.
I said, "Vai te fuder."
Yeah. This is on tape, Your father will hear that. But at some point, as we're sitting, and you have to understand how terrifying this bus was. We did not know at the time, but since I know all the people that were in charge of the poetry festival there, they were just appalled because the guy didn't know how to drive. And it was on these roads doing this, and we're trying to get up to this farmhouse. And in the midst of this whole thing, I mean, the bus was just buzzing. I got a poem in my head, and so about the first 5 or 6 lines kept rolling over and over and over again. And finally I turned around to Isabel, who was sitting next to me, and not wanting to leave her in the process of writing the poem, I said, "How do you say life dreams?" And she sat there for a second and told me, and so I wrote it down in Portuguese, and I kept writing in the little notebook until all of a sudden the poem just, it was like, started to like lay out in front of me. I said, "Hang on." So I sat and screamed it through and finished it, and then turned around and said, "Let's translate this." And as we started working on it, people were leaning over seats saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And at one point we had, 5 or 6 people all voraciously arguing, "That's not how you're going to,
Yeah, I was asking them actually to tell me, how did it say this? How did it say that?
Exactly. So, this is the poem.
Oh.
Do that. I cry at the drop of a hat. Meeting song. Poem written with Isabel Pinto, and hearing in its song the voices of Graça Capena, who was my host, and a professor there, and Clara Keating, who were off singing songs of the revolution to the French resistance guys up in the front of the bus. Life dreams merrily, so they say. I likewise float on this moment. Clear dream that is the Douro in this company of new friends. Musky bouquet of aging oak, blossoming spring that will be memory, looming somewhere, waiting to carry us all. Tomorrow's shadow warmed away by the clear voice of love, floating on the clear voice of the air between us. So, I had been thinking about this reading for a long time, and in the process of thinking about it, I was trying to think of what I can say to place these 2 women in my world, which is what I like to do, and in the world of the poetry community around us. And it's always trying to figure out what to say, and I don't want to write essays and so on and so forth. And as I was mulling this, because I've been mulling it for months, Isabel walked in and grabbed this, which had just been sent to me. This is a Chicago Review, and if you don't know about this, it's the Helen Adam edition. It's magnificent, and it had stuff in there I'd never seen. And Isabel picked it up, opened it, and read something, and I sat there and went, there it is. That's the beginning. So let me read to you this. This is Mr. Duncan in his preface to Helen Adams' Ballads. At the heart of these poems, there is a compulsive beat. It is the pulse the narrative poet contrives in her art to subject the listening intelligence to the story's spell. It is also the feet of ancient dancers tromping around the moon or against the sun. This is a very different mode from that of the poem that has followed the sun, S-O-N, the song, the sonnet, and sonata, to realize an inner music where intricate relationships of sound and sense demand the listener's attention. The melodic invention of the Orphic poem would so move us in the tone leading of its vowels that we escape from the feet that are dancing, and our intelligence is reborn, awakened by the unexpected shifts of the poem. And that, I mean, when Isabel read this to me, I was just delighted, because I said, that's both of these women and the poetry that I heard coming out of the two of you. And in the case of Amanda, who will be opening up for us, I mean, as I've been saying since we started this series, I look to the community, and Amanda is Gloucester to me, and she's working at the Gloucester Writing Center up there. I thought I had to ask her to make sure, but she goes all the way back with Ralph Maud and the Olson Society that she was in charge of. But I mean, the gift that has ultimately brought to us, and all that energy, and your part in it, Amanda, and your part in making that place up there with Henry and everybody, you know, a livable room that one wants to actually be in, is, you know, no small gesture to the community. And amongst this, she is also a parent. Children are running around in here. There's one.
Not all of them are hers. We're all
Not that she knows about, you know, we're not, you know. And just been doing wonderful things with that and writing at the same time. And I think it was, I forget how long ago where I really started to tune in on what you were doing, but even after I had asked her, suddenly the proofs for The Coming Bucket, which is due soon, right, Joe? You just published it.
Molly's working on the cover right now.
Sweet.
No.
And there's, I hope she's going to read some of them letters to Olson in there, which just, you know, blew my mind completely. Her other poetry has a vision to it that is unrelenting and in your face and tender all at the same time, which is, you know, no small achievement. And hopefully you've got a book coming from Bootstrap now, right?
Hey.
And so I have begged, borrowed, and pleaded her commitment to come back here for a little launch in the fall. We think that's when they're the way these things go. The fall of what we shall not say.
So that's what's
Okay. Small presses. Anyhow, she'll be back to relaunch that for a full-scale reading of that book, and it's just a delight to have you here, Kate. Please welcome Anna.
the really scary part of this. Fanny Howe was in Gloucester recently, and I said I would play a tune, and as of now, I am. And in a moment, if I pick this up and I freak out, I'm not. Give me a moment here, because this is the scariest part. I'm going to try it. Please forgive me. This is called King of the Fairies. She's Fanny Howe.
Okay.
All right, and I think I'll sit here, Christina, to make it an in-between.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Does that suit you?
sure.
All right, so I'm gonna start with a couple little one-offs, little things that don't really relate to anything else here. But the first is either gonna be called invisible labor or domestic movement. Who does laundry in Milan Kundera's novels? Who lifts baskets to their navels, bends buttocks in the air sorting socks? Whose breasts swing like pendulums over a load of whites? And whose nipples point like small peaks at a shirt on the ironing board while the old men sip brandy and plan small revolutions? So there's that. And then, just a little fun in case you happen to have breasts and buttocks and do a lot of housework. This is a spring haiku. Spring is here, I know, by the empty case of bud on the neighbor's deck. So I think I'm going to start the pieces of things with a bit of prose actually that's going to appear in the bucket. I feel like I keep telling the same story, and this was a different way of me telling the same story. The sun came in through the windows of the kitchen like smoke under a door. It hung in the air was so still, and it fell as it wished on what it wished. The mug on the table was bathed in sunlight, its turquoise brightening to almost white with the glare. Beside it, a newspaper sat, unchanged by the light, untouched. The water on the counter glistened, but the sink was dark. The pitcher of wooden spoons nearly turned amber with the glow, the tin of coffee obscured. It was late afternoon. Soon the whole room would fall into shadows. It would be easy to say the kitchen hadn't been cleaned in some time, but that wasn't the truth. It had been cleaned constantly, horribly, ineffectively. A film of black soot covered the bottoms of the percolator and the pots and the pans. It rubbed off on anything they touched. The sink was smudged with black, and the mugs had black smudges on the counter and the table. Black smudges everywhere. The wet rags by the sink were marked by the soot, and everything they touched was marked too. The stove was black and blackening. It was the stove that made the soot. 20 years old, bought from a restaurant supply store, the stove needed to be cleaned, serviced, made right. In protest of its poor condition, it sent the black soot to cover everything. Above the soot were cobwebs. The top shelves of the kitchen were dripping with them. As the sun sank, it would catch one here, throw a beam of light into another. The corner by the basement hung with a curtain of cobwebs suspended, it seemed, from more cobwebs. They clung to the spines of the old cookbooks, which hadn't been used in years, to the jars of things that hadn't been touched for years, and they clung to the boxes of old forgotten food and photographs peeking out from between the books and the newspaper clippings and the wooden pig painted with 2 different pinks and the old tins. Between the soot and the cobwebs was a layer of greasy dust. It could not be cleaned with a dry cloth, and it would not come off with a wet cloth, so it stayed there, sometimes smudged, growing thicker with every day. There was a cleaner part of the kitchen, from the stove to the sink. Cleaner, but not clean. The dishes on this side were marked not by grease and cobwebs, but by a combination of meals past that had never been completely washed off, and coffee grounds and soot. The glasses were washed to the point that they looked full of smoke. A can of something was open, a pot of something left out. An empty bottle of dish soap sat by the sink. It could have been empty for years. Cups of coffee dotted the counter and the table and the sink and the stove. A couple were near empty, traces of coffee hardening into a crescent in the bottom of the mug. Some looked like they had been poured and forgotten immediately, but most were half drunk, the milk turning, sitting on the cold surface of the coffee, making circles or clouds or patterns that looked like the wind. There was a cat on the table, or the ghost of a cat, or the memory. There was cat hair on the table. There was cat hair all through the house. It hid in the corners and gathered in balls and stuck to any surface that was wet or sticky or thick with dust. It was not so much in the parts that were still used, but in the forgotten parts it gathered, grew, formed a halo that glowed in the afternoon light. There was no part of the house as forgotten as the back room upstairs. The stories of that room were piled one on top of another. As full as the room was, it felt as empty as it was forgotten. That emptiness was the first story and the last story, and a part of each of the stories in between. The room had been empty for several years in the beginning, save for a stool and some boxes that would never be unpacked. She would sit in that room and cry. Or maybe that room had held a bed and a dresser and drawers full of things and some boxes that would never be unpacked, and she would sit in that room and cry. That history was as forgotten as the room. At some point, the floor had been painted with glossy black paint and tiny purple flowers. It was a labor of love. A bed for a little girl and a vanity to sit at, and a shelf for favorite things were moved in. The little girl moved in, and her brother and sister moved into the middle room, and the mother moved into the front room upstairs where all the children had been before. Even with the girl and the bed and the shelf, the room felt empty, and even after her dolls and books and clothing filled the corners and the floor, it stayed empty. It was a lonely room. No matter what was put in it, the loneliness hung in the air. Even when the wind rushed through, or a cat slept, or children played in it, the room was lonely and empty. And cold. It was the coldest room in the house. In the winter, the little girl would sleep with as many sweaters and nightgowns and blankets as she could find. When she woke in the morning, she could see her breath, and she could etch her name in the frost on the windows. On the coldest nights, she would leave her room and sleep on the floor in front of the wood stove downstairs. After the girl grew up enough that she could move away, the boy moved into the room. The dolls that sat along the shelf at the top of the room were put into boxes and moved to the attic. Antique trucks and fishing reels and boxes of baseball cards took their place. The vanity was replaced by a fish tank, its filter slowly gurgling until the tank was forgotten, and the water fell so low that the motor whirred as it moved air into the tank. In the bottom of the tank, an eel sank as low as it could, in a foot of water, then half as much, then just enough, then an inch, until it was near death, and the tank was filled again and forgotten. And the boy grew up nearly enough to move away, and he left too. He took some of the loneliness of the room and left some of his own. For some time, the room waited for him to come back because he was not grown up enough to leave, but it was too lonely for him. All of his things waited just where he left them. An open book on the unmade bed, CDs on the floor in broken cases, a crust of bread, an old pinball game. Only the fish tank changed it all. The water evaporated until all that remained was the skeleton of an eel, and a rock green with algae, and the whirring of a motor moving air. After some time, the pump was unplugged or the motor died. A cat spent the night locked in the room, and then another. A basket of fabric was tossed onto the unmade bed. A box of unopened mail and papers and little things left around the house that were quickly cleared when someone came to visit. An old rug, a book of ornamental patterns, a box of single shoes. Years of old coats were stuck in the closet, a tent, a set of dishes, the manual to a vacuum cleaner, a wooden box filled with marbles, a tube of white paint, a stack of children's drawings, a letter from an old friend. The woman and the man, there had been a man now for some time, put things in the room, things they couldn't be bothered with, things they couldn't bear. The room became so full it was hard to walk in. As the room filled, it spilled out into the next room, until both rooms were forgotten by everybody in the house, excepting the cats and dogs who would visit the room when the women and the man forgot about them. Sometime before the soot covered the kitchen, the woman decided which things she wanted to forget. She stuffed them into the corners and under the couches and in between the piles of laundry. She took the things she thought had been holding her back and put them in boxes of broken toys and old newspapers. She picked up a sketchbook and picked up her pens and went out to draw the world. The stories inside the house changed as they waited. The pipes in the drawer of the cobbler's bench were first her grandfather's, then her ex-husband's, then the man's before becoming her grandfather's pipes again. The red shoes were on sale downtown, then given to her, then found on the beach. Each thing lived a life of its own, then another and another, without anybody but the woman ever knowing. Nobody asked her, and nobody listened when she told them. The driftwood could have been from the day she swam with the seal, or washed up from the storm that took 6 fishermen, or it could have been from a camping trip to a distant shore. Nobody knew. So there's that. And the next part of things I'm going to read is the letter to Maximus, which is my response to Charles Wilson. Because eventually you have to deal with the man, right? At least if you live in Gloucester. You guys all have your own demons in your own towns. But I started this sort of realizing that there were always people coming to Gloucester with ideas about Olson, and people in Gloucester with big ideas about Olson, and everybody seemed to think their ideas were really important, and that everybody should know their ideas, and listen to them, and trust them, and that there was there were arguments about whose ideas were better on Olson or this or that, and I thought it was all bullshit. So I started this project of reading starting with the Maximus poems and reading one at a time and writing a response and then reading the next one. And I didn't really get very far. I'll get further someday. But this is Letter to Maximus, and the numbers and songs correspond to particular poems, which I'm sure you know by heart. Letter to Maximus. 1. I am reading your poems. It isn't that I haven't read them before, but I am reading them again, this time with care and attention and all the other words in my eyes. I am trying to make up with you, forgive you, as if you need my forgiveness. I am trying to mark the edges of your shadows so I can see where my Gloucester falls in it. Scholars can stop here. This isn't for you. 2. I am taking liberties. When the poem makes me think of the kitten we buried on 10-Pound Island because there was no land available to us at our first apartment on Mason Court, I will write about it. About how the woman downstairs wouldn't let the pregnant cat in when the storm was howling outside. About how we let her in and she gave birth, and when the storm was over she went outside and came back with a kitten, soaking wet, too weak to nurse. We warmed it and fed it with a dropper and it died. 3. By ear. I have listened to men talk about you more than I have listened to your words. I am sitting in Vincent Perini's house reading Catherine Bayless's copy of the Maximus poems. I am leaving Butterick in the legal box on the daybed. 4. Born. It occurs to me just now that I was born via C-section. I wonder if my grandfather delivered me. I wonder if he delivered Charlie. My own daughter wore your granddaughter's pants to school today. This is the form I take these days. Wash, fold, cook, clean. That too is a form of love. 5. Love is not easy. My closest friends growing up moved away. My closest friends now came to this place from somewhere else. That is a lie. There are some from here and some who stayed, but it is not easy. 6. It is raining outside. I don't want to prove myself to you. Poetry is so much a game of one-upsmanship these days, and my list of victories is weak. I can tell you, I have cooked for and cleaned up after some of the best one-upsmen of our day. One night, I left them talking in my kitchen and went squid fishing at the State Fish Pier. We drank wine and ran from the big dock down to the walkways between the boats and up again. When we got home with a couple pounds of squid, they were still talking. We pulled garlic from the garden and cleaned the squid and cooked it and called a Norwegian cab driver to come over, and between the poets and the cab driver and the squid fishers, we each had a few bites to eat. Letter 2. Someone recently said in an argument I was part of that Maximus was a fishing poem, and there didn't need to be any women in a fishing poem. She's never seen the women set up with their novenas or watched them throw confetti at St. Peter out their windows in the fort. Letter 3. Tansy. Garrett, apologies. Garrett disagrees with some of my ideas about Tansy in here, which we can talk about later. When I was young, my stepmother would lift me into the trees they had planted in a line in Stagefort Park. I remember so clearly sitting there, feeling invincible and so separate from everything below me. So much Tansy. There is something about riding the bus. I took the bus to and from Lanesville so often that the bus drivers still waved to me. One day, Mrs. Muncie took off all her clothes and sat naked on the bus until her stop. This rare thing, this Gloucester, is a choice we make. My children were born in Beverly. They don't deliver babies at Addison Gilbert anymore. On the day I brought my Abigail home, we walked to the top of Governor's Hill and looked out over the city, over the harbor, past the breakwater. I was sore and tired, but I had no food in the house and didn't know what to do with the family visiting to help. So we walked up the hill with the new baby in the stroller and walked down to Mike's to get subs. You should see the sign at Mike's. We call it Mike's because there are too many S's and the apostrophes are everywhere. I laughed when I saw Summer Sun. My first published poem outside of school was in the Summer Sun. I was a young poet, 19 I think, and you're in it. The poem, I mean. I took projected verse out of the library that summer and read it over and over before returning it to the library. It was a big summer for you too. They put on quite a show in your honor at City Hall. Pregnant women should avoid Tansy. It causes contractions, can bring on labor or abortion. It makes the mouth wet, Tansy. Someone wrote some years ago about the gentrification of Gloucester because he had seen a well-planted flower box in the houses in the fort when he was looking for your place. As if the people in the fort don't like flowers too. I should say something here of the islands of men and girls. I hardly know what to say. Song 1. I see so much of myself in these pages. In my book that never came out, insert Corbett Wiener's joke here, I ended. Words and pictures, we put them everywhere. When I say I love you, you think I am selling you soap. Song 2. This too, the bodies. Sometimes sitting still in chairs, eyelids flutter. I am in a cafe now with my own copy of your poems. I should say my husband's copy. The book is full of notes on little pieces of paper. The music here is all wrong. There should be no music. Song 3. Growing up cold, growing up not knowing how or where other kids got their clothes, happy with the adventure every so often to the Madras shop in Rockport or the flea market in Rowley, growing up on the bus or on foot, growing up never asking, having held my babies close to keep them warm when we were out of oil, and you standing alone, fly gaping. Song 4. I don't know what takes more strength than keeping a home while the men go out and waiting knowing they may not return and waiting praying for fish. Song 5. Apples. Song 6. How can we keep from singing? Letter 5 for Ariane. I had to walk away from this one. I had to walk away. If a poet pisses into the wind, I believe one can be a good writer and a good person at the same time, though some seem less concerned about this than I am. Who are you to say what Gloucester needs? I don't call myself poet any more than I call myself dishwasher or teacher or cleaner or cook, and much less than lover or mother or daughter or friend. I put as much care into a pot of soup as I put into a poem. On Thursday mornings, I work with children turning their words into poems. More often than not, they say, I love Mama. Maybe what this island of men and girls needs, maybe what this city has when poets posture and men go out to sea, is mothers. So there's that. You ready for one more section of things? All right. So the other thing I write are moments. Just, yeah. I don't know what else to say about them, but sometimes I put them on Facebook because that's quick publishing. So the first few of these are moments. Well, they're all moments. Sometimes you forget what fear feels like, then you see a man leaning on a shovel with a particular curve to his back, and you remember. I am the sort of housekeeper who, looking at a ring on a table, remembers fondly that particular cup of coffee. This morning, walking to get the car, there is gray everywhere, the streets, the sky, everywhere. A woman walked toward me. As she got closer, I could see my name tattooed across her chest. I know my mother is alive because this morning the nurse called my house accidentally, but once or twice a week I dream she has died and wake with some phantom pain. Everything is heartbreak today. The woman with the car doors open, the empty recycling bin. There is a space somewhere under my rib cage. It is weary, aching, like a waiting room. I lit a candle, ate an orange, wrote a poem on the wall. Still it sits, still that hollow, dreading being filled. Shortening as we... A cool morning, rain falling on yesterday's laundry. Last night the air was full of blossoms. It made a kind of mischief in me, like May Day girls dancing in white. It felt like cherry blossoms, and cherry blossoms feel like you. I tried to call you, dropping Garrett off as the late morning sun broke through the rain, looking back through his jungle, the taste of sorrel in my mouth. The air smelled like rain and rain on earth, and I missed you. I dialed your number. That is all that came of it. These days, I am baking scones for neighbors, making whales out of old fabric, saving bottle caps and pull tabs. Sunday morning, the sun rose first like a pink ghost, then orange with a red halo, and finally bright and bold and yellow. I am making stories out of hellos and goodbyes and writing middles where nothing was before. I am making myself giddy with thin air. Today, I locked my keys in the car and breathed reconditioned air. I ate bland food and sat through idle chatter. I bought diapers and fabric and buttons and bug spray. I didn't care through all of it because I am using my imagination. I am making characters to suit my needs. They gather little bits of quiet exuberance and try to build a life of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.
You're trouble. If, for no other reason than the work that Ms. Davis has done at the Woodbury Poetry Room, I would be asking her here to read. The act upon poetry of inclusion to me is currency, and that is exactly what you have done there in a way that I have never experienced in the 30 years that I have lived here. And it's been an extraordinary change down there. There's always been poetry there, and there's always been good poets that have come through there, but it's now a destination, in my imagination, of the places I have to keep track of what's going on. I remember a notorious day where Louisa Solano had put a thing that big that said, Robert Creeley will be reading at Harvard today in room 106, and it had gone up about an hour earlier, and that's the way things sort of were. You know, you were supposed to know. And it's not that way anymore. And the breadth of the poetry that she is bringing in, not to the exclusion of one to the other, so that we're all down there bumping one against the other and listening to different types of poetry that we should be aware of, has been a great, great, great gift to us, and I thank you for it. And as I said, if for no other reason, you should be here reading because of that interest. But there are other reasons. They're sitting behind me here. These two books, which are hovering behind us like burying angels. I've been going back through these books and rereading them, and the gift of those books as well is huge. And about, I don't know, I was going to say halfway through, it doesn't matter. So at some point in the most recent book, For the Raven,
They're so short when you get halfway through. It's like
well, that's why I didn't want to define. But the experience that I had in reading this was that at some point it just opened in a way that was absolutely breathtaking. And this figure kept coming to me as I was reading in the evenings over and over again. And I said, I don't know if I can get hold of this guy that is coming to me as I'm reading, because he was a juggler, and the juggler came in, and he wasn't simply a juggler in my realization as I was reading. He was a freaking exquisite juggler, and he was doing all this stuff that jugglers do incredibly exquisitely well, to the point where you're sitting there going, this is breathtaking juggling, my God. But suddenly, instead of juggling the normal pens or whatever apparatus that they use, the juggler was juggling a great bird. And then he was juggling the moon. And then he was juggling air. And suddenly he was juggling poetry. And this was all this lovely swirl that pulled up out of your book as I was reading it. And to arrive at that point of poetry in the midst of a book, I mean, is all that any of us could strive for, and boy, you sure do. And it is a pleasure to have you here today. Please welcome.
I'm gonna try sitting. We'll sing. Let's sing.
As long as you don't go to sleep.
It is such a pleasure to be here and to read with you, Amanda. Thank you. And I wrote something about you too. It had occurred to me that what's so great about poetry is that you don't all by yourself have it. It's born of a community, and a community is a made and shape-shifting and dynamic thing. And I just wanted to say, I have this opportunity to say that it's been such a pleasure to be in Boston during this flourishing of its poetry community. And I wanted to thank Michael and John Mulrooney and Amanda and all the people who run reading series here in this area for bringing into being such an intimate and idiosyncratic and equitable sort of space of exchange, which is what I tried to do at Harvard, but it is like hegemony's mothership. It is like, it's really impossible. But I did want to say that in my own time, in my own work, and I've written it down, I have been trying to resist architectures of power and defy the confines and constructs that would limit and define us, because what I want in my own life and in my poetry is the widest relational range, and that's meeting and morphing and music and meander. So that's some of the work I'm going to be sharing with you today, the stuff that Harvard doesn't pay for. Let's see, what else I read first? In lieu of a fiddle. And I should say that I come from a family of fiddlers, so that was really a particularly powerful way to begin. I thought I would share with you this poem called Mayborn. It's taken from the word that Thoreau uses most in Walden, other than I, which I think you probably know. He basically broke the uppercase, and the typographers forevermore had to add more capital I's to the case. But the word he used most was neighbor, which I've always found so striking about this person that we think of as being so solitary. And anyway, so I added the letter N, so neighborn, to sort of mean being near, being born near. But there's also, as I think Boyd pointed out to me once, this other nay in it, which is the nay of no, which is going through this, and I think you'll hear. Oh, I have it here. The only thing you might need to know with a K is that landlord and waterlord is a phrase that Emerson used when he first bought the plot on Walden Pond. It was a joke. He called himself landlord and waterlord. So, Mayborn, and it has an epigraph from Bernadette Mayer. I have hope in the sombre. I did not let gradually myself be privatized. I did not hang the haunted child Christ above my mind. To live in someone else's idea is civilization. I came and could not conserve myself, came and could not metabolize the happenings. Neighborn I came among the touchable, and numerous in the grass I was, a finger among fingers. On me the sun paid the great attention, a light not only in the service of persons, and fell and raised myself up again to feet or near to standing, for such as I was eligible. I did not come in the posture of apology. I am the body here for the ones buried, for each seed secretly believing it will be the repeated thing. I cannot guess what you are with child with, or I am with child with. Nature was the music that was on when I was beginning to think. When I was learning the little differences, nature was on. In places I was practicing, a swimming involving every part of the water, the thoughts I was trying to have in the collective head in defense of their continuing. I did not let the names fall asleep on the named. I do not speak the sentences that sell things. Landlord and waterlord, this which is ever being tested on our animal. This animal I am being human in, this nakedness from which we are not dismissed. Poor creature clad in its brief authority, it occupies me, this errand out of narrowness, this skull healed too soon into descriptions of a ceiling. I do not think our minds should be so many descriptions of a ceiling, through self to arrive at selves, and through selves the self again. So we continue the contrary journey. It's so strange because I never print out my poems, so this is like meeting them for the first time. Amendment. The love of each of us for some of us for all of us, equally valued being in the world, most evident in its failure. And what would come if it were welcome? If learning were to prepare a self with which to welcome the inadmissible stranger whose very being gives evidence of a discrepancy, of something unfamiliar by me. The first man and the first woman are no longer here. They came here and changed. Change is the condition of knowing them now. I don't know what's next. We'll see what's next. Shit. Mankindness. So this poem has its epigraph, Anne Waldman's line, "Kind mind, don't die." Just a magnificent line. But it's driven by a phrase that I kept seeing every time I went to Concord above this door, and it's attributed to Plato apparently, but it's so damn Christian that I just cannot believe it is Plato. It goes something like, "You must be kind to each person you meet because he is fighting a hard battle." So mankindness. This is before the pronoun they was given to me, so it has some he's and she's in lieu of the more correct they. Because he, because she, insofar as she, insofar as he exists, is on the way to battle. Each one of us has come here and changed, is the battle, born a loved one, born a loved one. My father fought in this war, thus I can speak of it. My mother fought in this, thus I can speak. And I, insofar as I can say I, have fought to be related to these, and may I nothing harm in case it is them. Between the summons of the coming and the anguish of retention, there is that in me which would bend over the cradle of whether each is breathing. I find mostly each is breathing the quiet riot of names published in their cemetery. Kind mind, don't die. I find mostly each repeating the thought of himself as what came through, the thought of herself as what came through. The stranger you know me to be, the stranger I know to be you. I have sent so many words over that wall. I thought of ourselves as what came through. These lips by which we are published, this thing which publishes the mouth, these hands that reach insofar as the tremendous inhibition of blood allows. I came and testified with my body. You came and testified with your body. We thought there was given to each a second time. Its name was ages, in which to come and testify with the body. I was not intentionally ulterior. You were not intentionally ulterior. Meanwhile, a wound grew where I did not know I was a soldier. Do you ever have that where you start on a voice and then you can't shift? You're like, shit. So I had that where I was like, oh. Okay. Image Nation, and this is for Robin Blazer, so it's Image Nation, which is titles he used, or Imagination, if you chose to see it. It's very brief for all that. And I accuse myself in this. I include myself in the accusation. This which asks, each alone why, he fails, she fails, repeatedly to be freedom for another. And may the fourth wall never find it. This is called Corpus. I haven't come up with a better title. So put your thinking cap on. A body is not obliged to tell from the beginning itself from everything. It is a subtraction a body is not obliged to do. It is possible a body is still becoming people and not a person, may persist where strangers are expected. Don't know what I'm doing. Okay. I'd like to dedicate this to the man to my left, Boyd Nilsson, who has been such a dear friend and companion and a loving advocate of my work. Over the summer, he consented repeatedly to one of my favorite rituals, which is reading poems on top of the tombs at Mount Auburn Cemetery. And if you date me, you get to do that. Even if you don't. And I remember vividly sharing this poem with him. And by the way, so after the summer was over, after the summer was over, I walked around the base of the tomb and saw that that it was where the Bournes were buried. So basically we were sitting on top of a tomb called Bourne, which you just can't make that shit up. So the question that gave rise to the poem was, what are we compelled by birth to adhere to? Being born as we are inside a body, within a nation, all these kinds of sidedness. And then what can we gradually refuse allegiance to or identity with? And the poem is called Cairn. And it has as its epigraph another powerful woman. It seems to be a day of powerful women. Lynn Heginian. And it is, I was organized by addition. Cairn. I think I should sit up. This fastened in the dark to me. Does it hurt? Said the nurse. Sidedness. Adherence of a name to me. So many words seeking to name my mouth. A crawling on all fours to be stood amid introductions. Attachment of time to me. Day, which is as old as each thing in it, screens on which wars did most the bleeding, weathers that came all the way to my face, certain clothings I cannot come out of, a gravity added to everything, adherence of hurts to me, emissions from mouths, so many dents in the sentences where the other was, a terrible towardness, every last thing coming at me with its one life, awaking through bird start, what beauty came to pronounce, certain words best said in the turning toward home the going to you was, a refusal to worship where I met the mirrors, country I was a citizen of, from birth now to collision with its walls, adherence to some, not other limits, some, not other signals, love, the message you are to get to me, and body which houses the consequences, allegiance to earth, the all-law, what sundown says, night being applied to the entire tree, talons, alphabets, hands, all the instruments meant to share food. I am a member of anyone with blood, every red word the body says. All the computers in the world cannot hold fallout from what is done by fingers, sidedness, Chernobyl flower growing through wounds in the sidewalk. A mind is what happens from head to foot. So many funerals held here, a walking on the anyone's grave, fingering the lusts the trees outlast. Tenderness like a breast I am being put on, made of many mothers. The seeds some said I needed to achieve. I made numerous myself. I made numerous myself. I am a woman for longer than I bleed. Adherence to some, not other summons, some, not other governance, reality, the one truth that gets funded, every last pollution it is doing, to certain facts adherence, the so many dots where I am a city, little X's for the dead, a reverence at the tombs of my teacher, history, its undiminished account, First Amendment of my Fifth Amendment of my 19th Amendment of my having a mouth. The instrument I play, you don't put down. Language, lungs, an application I am making with blanks filled in by breathing. Everything outside the province of the body is a foreigner, but not for long, already having sided with the world.
Wow.
Nice.
Well,
That's my menopause poem. Got that on tape. Okay. And this is gonna be my last one. Yeah. I mean, I have one more I can read, but I think it's a little long. And just so you know how not kind I am feeling for what's going on. What's going
Just
on?
crack
You're
the
hot.
door. Yeah, hot.
You're hot now?
Yeah.
Okay, open the
Door's open.
Okay.
Sorry.
This was my expression of how not kind I'm feeling toward one person, even though the book's called Mankindness. So I'm gonna close with this poem I wrote on the day of the climate march. And I think all you need to know is that the word chimney, regrettably, refers to Sean Spicer's denial of the gas chambers. A fire for Donald Trump. You were poorly invented. Some awfulness got caught in an anatomy and was given your name. You have made a lie for a face. You have hired so many faces to say you. We would burn effigies, but do not want to pollute earth with your image, kindle more of your kind. You have already taken up an entire person, have died all over everything inside. You have spent our airtime. You have spent our airtime denying chimneys. When they unearth your bones, when the hands of history have at you, what was that? A child will ask. And what was coal? A fire in the memory of our fathers. Thank you.
Thank you, dear.
Sure.
And you, ma'am?
Thank you, sir.
Both of you, just
Empower the women.
Howard?
And the Manuel.
Power of poetry. Next up, June 4th, right? I think. Mr. Wellman. Keith Jones is in this room. You guys are done for the year, right? I mean, is yours?
Oh, we are so done.
You're so done.
I might not even come back.
We will come for you. There will be a posse of people, dragging you back. Thank you all for coming. Food, wine, fold up your chairs, check out the collages, and bless you all.